Champions. I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative. I am so pleased today to introduce you to Jonathan Daugherty, the founder and president of Be Broken Ministries, a sexual integrity ministry that helps men and their wives and families move from sexual brokenness to wholeness in Christ. Jonathan founded the Gateway to Freedom 3-day workshop for men based on his book, Grace Based Recovery. Be Broken's wives care programs help women recover from betrayal trauma. Jonathan hosts the weekly radio program, Pure Sex Radio, and is in demand nationally as a speaker on sexual integrity and men's issues. He's appeared on multiple radio and television shows such as ABC's Nightline, Oprah, The 700 Club, Focus on the Family, and Family Life Today. He has written 4 books and recently introduced an honest talk game to open avenues for families to have key conversations with their kids about sex. Jonathan, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, let's talk about Be Broken. What exactly is your ministry and who would come to you?
Yeah, so we deal specifically with issues of sexual brokenness, whether that be pornography or maybe infidelity in a relationship, or just all of the other ways in which somebody can have a skewed understanding of God's design for sex and sexuality. And so we are seeking to help them move from that, whatever that sexual brokenness is, to more of a wholeness in Christ, and thereby actually managing and stewarding their sexuality in a way that is honoring to God and more in line with how He designed it. So I would say that the predominant audience that we are dealing with is married couples. Probably 80% of our clients that we deal with are married. And so we're constantly dealing with that marriage issue, and how does sexual brokenness manifest in a marriage, and then what are the ways that couples can recover from that, experience restoration, and really even still have thriving intimate marriages, even if they've experienced some kind of sexual brokenness or betrayal.
Well, those are some of the hardest problems in a marriage, I would imagine. And as marriage champions, I'm sure so many of our mentors have come across those problems. So it's really great to know that there's a resource like yours to help people get to for some help and some hope when they come and present. I would imagine as our marriage champions, that would really be one of those things when a couple comes. And so when that couple comes to the marriage champion and they refer them to you, how does that, who comes, what would that look like?
Yeah, so we have 2 main kind of ministries that we help a couple with, and that is the ministry to the husband. So we've got the ministry to the man, and then we've got the ministry to the wife. Now, what our typical scenario is that we deal with, I mean, 90+% of the time, is where there has been a sexual betrayal by the husband. So whether that again be pornography or an affair or something like that, and then the wife is the one that has now experienced that sexual betrayal. And you're right, Amy, there's very little. In fact, I've talked to couples that have experienced, let's say, sexual betrayal in their marriage, and they've experienced something as tragic as like the loss of a child. And in some ways they're saying, yeah, while they're not the same thing, the way in which those types of traumas can destroy and devastate your life emotionally, mentally, spiritually, it's just, it will rock your world. And I believe the reason that the sexual betrayal is so profound and painful is because by God's design, He created that sexual union that is supposed to happen in a covenant marriage between one man and one woman for a lifetime, to be such a reflection of the intimacy that God desires with us, that to have anything that breaks that or anything that interferes with that, it is breaking something that God has created that was intended to be such an intimate bond that is not to be experienced in any other kind of way or any other kind of relationship in life. So when there is betrayal in that, it does cut deep to a person's soul. So what we try to do is we take that husband, and we say, okay, we're going to help you dig down to the roots of your issues of sexual brokenness, because it's easy to look at the symptoms. Okay, let's look at the pornography issue, or let's look at the what led to the affair, those kind of things. And it's not that we ignore those things, but what we're saying is, if we don't get down to the root, where that man's pain is, where his trauma is, where he is operating from a false belief or a false understanding, if we don't get to that point, then in many ways we're just kind of we're medicating symptoms, but we're not actually healing. We're not actually transitioning that guy to a completely different way of living. So through our workshops and some of those other kinds of resources that we have, we help a man get to the roots of those issues. For the wife, we're trying to take her on a healing journey, because she has received something. She's been traumatized and wounded by something that was not her fault. It doesn't matter. We're not saying that the wives that have been traumatized by sexual betrayal are without sin or perfect or anything. We're not saying any of that. But what we are saying is the betrayal trauma that was done to them was not their fault. There's no blame. A wife is going to have to go through a healing process, regardless of what happens to the relationship with her husband, whether or not the marriage is restored or not. Because if she chooses to simply disconnect and say, okay, I'm going to divorce, I'm going to go, but does not go through that healing process, then she's only going to be carrying that unforgiveness. She's going to be carrying that bitterness that will grow, and she won't really experience freedom herself from the betrayal. And so there's a process by which the husband has to go through, and the wife, if there's going to be real restoration in the marriage. And those are the
Well,
resources that we provide for both husband and wife.
well, you just about brought tears to my eyes as I am thinking about somebody who's right in that spot right now. And since you've so eloquently described the wife's part, let's keep going with that. Could you like really drill down and explain very very concretely about what a wife who is in that hurt place would find if she accesses your information on the website?
Yeah, we have an entire, what we call our wives care ministry. And this is run by Gigi Hopkins. She's actually our director of wives care. And she and her team have put together an incredible online care group uh, resource. That these are 6-week groups that help women together to go through the process of healing. Now, we're not saying that it only takes 6 weeks for a wife to heal from betrayal trauma, but in terms of really getting to the key principles and things that a wife is going to need to work on, things like self-care, things like dealing with trauma. How do you even understand betrayal trauma, and how do you heal from that? Being able to, yes, deal with the issue of forgiveness, but what does that look like, and how can you actually navigate that, not in a way that is shame based or guilt driven, but that is like, I really want my soul to heal, and I want to be able to forgive as Christ has forgiven me. So there's a sense in which there's all this progression of healing. And one of the things that the wives will discover when they connect with our wives care ministry is just how much our wives care ministers are personally connected to this journey and these resources. 100% of all of our wives care leaders, the women who lead these groups, they have all come through these groups themselves, and they have all experienced betrayal trauma themselves. So this is not just some kind of like academic ivory tower resource that basically says, okay, we put a whole bunch of women in a room, and we gave them some books on betrayal trauma healing, and now they're going to lead you. No, it's like they've walked the walk. They have actually experienced this. And in that sense, what so many wives have told us when they come into our wives care ministry is it's like they felt safe, they felt heard, they felt like they belonged, because they were connecting with women who could empathize with them, not just have sympathy. And that was key and that's key for healing in any type of hurt, is we need to feel like somebody has seen us. They really hear our story. They know what we're going through more from an experiential standpoint than just from, oh, I saw that in a book somewhere and I think this is what I'm supposed to tell you. It's like, no, I understand that pain. Tell me more about it. I want to learn and I want to know. I want to know you. And so that's a huge part of our Wives Care ministry.
Well, I love that you brought up the word story, because that's what I was going to ask you next, because that the power of sharing a story is something that's really a hallmark of your ministry. And you know, whether it's with the women together and in the group, or whether it's with the men, that's kind of how you start, right? With the men is sharing that story. And then it kind of began with your story. Would you share a little bit of that and why you even were inspired to start Be Broken Ministries?
Sure, yeah. I didn't get into this ministry because I had, like a 20-year dream to start a ministry like this. I got into this ministry because God told me in 3 words what I was supposed to do with my life, and that was tell your story. And so, briefly, my story was a story of sexual brokenness and addiction that started when I was introduced to porn at 12 years old by a friend. And because I had no point of reference for understanding what porn was, and I didn't know what to do with that, it really kind of set hooks in me and then started to become kind of a drug for me all the way through junior high and high school, that eventually led to me being sexual with other people. I'm not married yet when I was in college, and I'm starting to be sexual, and I'm just going down this path of dividedness, where I was basically learning how to live a double life. I was learning how to present myself outwardly as a good Christian kid that had it all together, and everything looked good and right on the outside. Maybe for those of our, for those our Christian viewers or listeners, I was a good little Pharisee. you know, I had the whitewash on the outside, but there was uncleanness inside. And I was raised in the church, so there was at least a sense of a basic understanding of where God had drawn the lines for sex. And so as I'm going through college, I think subconsciously, maybe even a little, not even so much subconsciously, I just thought, if I get married, I bet that would solve all these problems that I'm having with all this sexual brokenness. And so I did end up getting married, and it did not solve my problems. If anything, it started to magnify other areas of my life that were problems, not the least of which was that through my addiction, through my pornography and sex addiction, I was an incredibly self-centered, narcissistic person. In other words, it was causing me to believe that all that really mattered in my life was my feelings, my desires, my appetites. And marriage doesn't cure that. It can, in my case, it exposed how real that was, but I wasn't ready to change yet. And so eventually, first 4 years of my marriage, I just kept going fuller into my sexual addiction, and got back into pornography. Eventually was also then physically unfaithful to my wife on multiple accounts, because this was the mid 90s when the internet was coming out, and I started using the internet to then set up offline encounters. And then when that didn't work, I would even go solicit prostitutes. So in 1999, my wife left after I confessed everything to her. And it wasn't that I was confessing because I thought that, hey, I want to be a new man. It was more because I was too much of a chicken or too lazy to write a suicide note. I was depressed and suicidal at this time. So anyway, I confessed everything to my wife, but long story short, my wife left, and that was actually the catalyst that God used to bring me into recovery. And so after 9 months of separation, my wife and I were reconciled. And so we've been married for almost 27 years now, and have 3 grown kids. But out of that, about 3 years after my wife and I got back together, that's when God started prompting me to start this ministry. And I actually wrestled with him for about a year over it, because I didn't want to do it, to be honest. And the reason I didn't want to do it was because I falsely assumed that once you go through a process of healing and recovery, then you can leave all of that pain and brokenness behind you. And this is what I really want people to hear is we are not inviting people into this ministry so that they can leave all their pain and brokenness behind them. We're inviting people into this ministry so they can understand the fullness of the healing and power and love of God so that they can actually be transformed and actually they can get a different vantage point on their pain and brokenness. Not so that they can try to leave it in the rearview mirror and then somehow be this perfect little, angel of a couple that never has any struggles anymore. I mean, my wife and I have been married for almost 27 years. Guess what? It's an ongoing journey of struggle and difficulty and going through seasons of pain and turmoil and all those kinds of things. It doesn't have sexual addiction as part of it anymore. Thank God that has been eliminated from my life. But it doesn't mean that there's no more pain or brokenness in our lives. And so what I want people to hear is if they come to be broken, yes, we want them to see healing. We want them to see freedom from the strongholds that have been gripping their life. But we don't want them to think at all that, number one, they're absolutely going to be done with any pain or brokenness in their life, or that pain and brokenness cannot be used by God in a profound redemptive way. We want to cast that larger vision for people that says, hey, you know what? At some point, God's going to tell you to tell your story too. It may not be a national ministry, but it might be to your neighbor. It might be to a coworker. It might be to a family member. And in that way, you're passing on that grace and that transformation that you've experienced in your life. So long story longer, that's how story matters in our ministry.
Well, I love that you said that about the story and how, because again, there are different entree points. Your website at bebroken.org does such a great job of providing some 45-minute little, this is who we are, this is what we're about, kind of an on ramp for people. But then when that man comes to you or that couple comes to you and that man is ready for change, that's one of your end goals, is that they will be ready to tell their story, because that's so important in your ministry, not just your personal story, Jonathan, but that of the other men that have so let's talk a little bit about more that man that comes to you. Like you said, your wife left you. That was a catalyst. I would assume that that's one of the catalysts that our marriage champions might see when those couples are sitting in front of them. They're probably right there in that same spot. So if they tell the man to call you or to go to your website, what would he find? Who would that man be, and what would he find?
Yeah, well, a lot of the men that do find us, they do find us because they've been referred, whether it be by their wife or by a counselor or somebody else. And one of the first things we are going to try to introduce them to is actually our 3-day intensive workshop, which is Gateway to Freedom. And the reason we go right there, because it seems like, wow, that seems like a big ask to have a guy come for a whole weekend, $1,000, all this kind of stuff. But the reason we go there is because we say, listen, that is the if I can put it this way, the fastest, most powerful, intense way that you can get the momentum and the catalyst for change that you're actually looking for in your life. It doesn't mean that none of our other resources have value or can't help, but there's a vast difference between a guy signing up for our 40-day online course, which is going to take him through 40 days of just kind of helping him understand how do I understand purity from God's perspective? How do I break free from some of these things? Big difference between doing kind of a self-paced online course and coming to that workshop where it's like you are going to immediately be immersed in an environment where you have staff also that has gone through this kind of journey themselves, but you're also going to be able to get in with other men and counselors that are going to be able to help you get down to the root. And what we've heard from so many guys that have then come through that program is how much it shifted the paradigm for them. They often are coming in with a mindset of, okay, here's my problem, and fill in the blank: pornography, I'm having affairs, I'm doing these other things. When they get to the workshop and we start helping them to realize, actually, there's a deeply broken emotional system that you have. You have never known how to bond well. You don't know how to talk about your feelings. You don't know how to deal with triggering emotions. There's all kinds of things that are very deeply embedded in that man that he just takes for granted. It's like, this is the way I am, instead of realizing, well, the way you are is broken. And so there's transformation is possible. And so that when the paradigm shifts to where they realize, oh, there's something at a much deeper level that needs to actually be transformed in my life, then what they discover is, it's not, if I can put it this way, it's not that hard to live like a man of integrity when the foundation is laid properly. And so that's why we have no interest really in, slapping away symptoms. We're like, behavior modification is useless. All these other kinds of tools, if you think an internet filter is going to solve your problem, that's useless. I mean, not useless, but it's like, though, that's
You'll
not
find
what's
your way
going.
around it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not. So what, a lot of times, Amy, what people ask me, especially men, they'll ask me this, like, okay, what's the secret? Like, what's the answer? And most of the guys are dealing with internet pornography. They'll be like, what's the solution to my internet porn problem? And I'm not actually trying to be flippant when I say this, or even just comical, but I say that's easy. A thriving relationship with Jesus. And the reason I say that is because when you get the heart right, when you get the foundation right, here's what I've found. When a man starts to learn what it is to have a thriving relationship with Jesus, guess what starts to lose its power and its influence and its pull? All the sexual temptations that he's been dealing with, because he's finally understanding how he was designed emotionally, how he was designed psychologically, how he was designed spiritually and relationally. Especially, what does it look like for him now to be a husband who loves his wife as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her? See, he's probably never known what that actually looks like from a really deep level. And he's probably never known that there's an enormous connection, a direct connection between that and all of his sexual brokenness. And so sometimes when I start talking like this, people think, okay, you're not even in the realm of sexual purity anymore. It's like, but it's all connected. And that's the journey that we want to take guys on when a guy comes to us, is we want to say, we know why you're here, why you think you're here. We want you to see what's actually going to need to happen in order for you to be the kind of man that you really want to be, which is a man who doesn't look at porn, or a man who doesn't have affairs on his wife. But we want to take them to the deeper issues, so that they're operating more from a place that is full of joy and peace and hope and love, and not from the places before that were full of lust and selfishness and idolatry.
Well, and that is really too the topic of your book, the Grace-Based Recovery book, and you have some other books too, Secrets, and some others that kind of go into that and unpack that. And when we were talking, you mentioned too that you can have a relationship with, even between a husband and wife, that an intimate relationship that does not honor God. It just because you're married doesn't mean everything is good and right. And that's something that you address too.
Yeah. In fact, sometimes that's shocking when I talk to Christian husbands and I tell them, oh, did you know that you can actually have inappropriate sex with your wife? And they're like, what are you talking about? And the reason I say that is because it's exactly what Jesus said. When Jesus was essentially given the Sermon on the Mount and he was outlining all of what people were thinking the law was really about, he said, let me tell you what it's really about. It's actually about your heart. So just because you say, I haven't committed adultery, meaning, you know what, that I've not been sexual with somebody other than my spouse. What does he say? He says, if you look with lustful intent, you've committed adultery in your heart. In other words, if I'm going to have a using type sexual relationship with my wife, where I'm essentially saying, I want to have lustful intent, I want to actually consume my wife rather than actually lay my life down for her and give to her, that's an inappropriate sexual connection with your wife. So, if a guy's fantasizing about pornography while he's being sexual with his wife, that is not holy sexuality in a marriage. So we try to let people know, whether they're single or married, when we're talking to these men, it's like, you've got to go on a journey of having a life of holiness and purity before God that is not just about your relationship status. Unfortunately, a lot of guys, when they get married, they think, okay, fine, now everything goes. Well, is that really true? I don't believe so from a biblical standpoint. Can you do something that's going to be painful or hurt your spouse and think that somehow that's holy sexuality? No. So we're trying to give a new way of thinking about integrity and purity and holiness that is ultimately about love. Like, how do you actually love your spouse in a way that is sacrificial, that is giving, that is cherishing? And when that starts to become the paradigm that you're operating from, guess what? If I could put it this way, then all things do become permissible. Because from that place of purity and from that place of holiness, you'll never do anything that will harm or hurt your spouse. And so there's a permission, if I can put it that way, that comes from holiness, if that makes sense. That's kind of where we're trying to go with that.
No, it does. And I think that's so helpful in that you give steps. You really walk alongside, both with the retreat, and then you have the groups, like you have the groups for the women, you have the groups for the men, to continue to walk alongside, modeling, teaching them how to have that integrity. Now, I really want to make sure we don't miss your family resources, because like you said, you were introduced to pornography when you were 12. And now we've got cell phones, with things. So you've developed some resources for parents and families, and I really want to make sure you have some time to talk about that.
Yeah, so our family care ministry is actually kind of our newest ministry. It's less than 5 years old, and part of it, there was a progression to the ministry. We started as like dealing with men, because I'm a man, tell my story. Okay, so I'm talking to men, and then very quickly we realized the vast majority of these men were married, and now there's these wives that are struggling with betrayal trauma. And then we discovered, you know what? Most of these married couples have children. And so it was just kind of a natural progression of then now having a family care ministry. And so I'm so excited about our family care ministry because it's a little bit different than our other ministries. Our wives care ministry and our men's ministry are really trying to address manifestations of sexual brokenness. So we're talking about men who've already acted out in ways that are either sexually inappropriate or unhealthy. We're talking about wives who face the betrayal of sexual inappropriateness. With family care, we are very much about preparation and prevention. So honestly, our family care resources are not about solving problems or dealing with kids that have already acted out or already gone across lines. We have relationships with other ministries that can help in those ways. But our family care ministry is primarily around helping parents of especially young children through about early teens to really be prepared and help them to prevent going down these paths. And the main things that our family care resources are really actually trying to address is the emotional resilience of children, and also what does it look like to form healthy emotional bonds with their parents. And so again, it can feel like, wait a second, we just left the realm of like sexuality and all. No, one of the things that we've discovered, we did some of our own research a few years ago with teenagers, and we were asking them, what is, if they would want to talk with their parents about their sexual struggles or just anything around sexuality. Vast majority of them were like, yes. They were actually like, they actually did. They actually said yes. The vast majority said, yes, we want to actually talk with our parents. And then, but when asked, have you ever talked with your parents about this? The vast majority said no.
Okay.
So there is a desire. And then when asking them why don't you talk with your parents when you have this incredible desire to want to actually talk with your parents? And two main reasons came to the surface. One is that they would get in trouble, that they would be basically, that they would get in trouble, or just the what was the other one? It was something about the reaction of the parents, that they wouldn't understand or they'd shut it down. So there's a sense in which kids want to talk to their parents, and yet they have a perception that if I do, it's going to go poorly. So all of our resources in family care are geared to really helping parents push in to those conversations that are going to draw their kids out so that they can learn how to share their feelings, talk about difficult things in a safe space, and understand that their parents are safe people to talk to. Now, what this means a lot of times is that then the parents are really confronted with the reality of maybe what they haven't yet faced in their own journey of their own sexual brokenness. So what we're finding is as some of these resources are being embraced by parents, they're realizing, you know what, maybe I need to go to a workshop. Maybe I need to take an online course. Maybe I need to do some things to really try to help some of where my own wounds still exist or my own false thinking still exists in this area. But we're so excited about the family care because we are seeing it really. I think it has the potential to have generational impact, like literally change the trajectory of some family trees that have experienced tons of brokenness in their history.
Well, that is so aspirational. And you do, too, your resources. You have a new conversation, kind of a webinar, right, on your website. And then you also introduced a game. Can we talk about the game for just a minute?
Sure, yeah. So it's called Honest Talk, the game, and it's based on the book Honest Talk that our director of training, John Fort, wrote. And really, again, it's about emotional resilience and the connection. How do you? It's not just about like having the talk with your kids when they're teenagers, whatever. It's like, how do you actually have ongoing dialogue with your kids about difficult things? And so the game is really actually it's a card game. One of the things that separates it from just, let's say, like conversation starter cards is that it's literally a game, meaning like there's a competitive element to it.
You can
And
win.
yeah, you can win. And the kids or the players are actually even incentivized by getting more points for the more vulnerable questions they're willing to answer. So there's like four sections, four different categories of the cards. And if they're gonna be willing to answer a question about sex, like, man, that's a lot of points. So
Big
then
scoring.
exactly. And so I think what we're starting to find with some of our test groups, and now the game is available, is that this is creating a new element that allows for dialogue that might have otherwise felt very awkward or forced. It reminds me, I'll tell you a quick story. It reminds me of when I was a kid, Amy, and I was a basketball player. I mean, I was obsessed with basketball and I was pretty good at it. But we had a hoop at our house, and I would go out and I would I'd shoot hoops for hours and hours and hours. And one of the things my mom, she told me this later, but one of the things that she discovered was she said, you know what? I could always get you to talk to me when you were shooting hoops. And what she realized was having that sort of middle distraction, like I'm not like sitting across the table from you face to
Right.
face, and now you're asking me this really difficult question about my day or about my feelings or whatever. Having that game in between us allowed for a whole lot more freedom in terms of the conversation. We believe that the same is happening with this game too. There's a sense in which, hey, we're passing cards and we're doing these things. There's enough of like a buffer there that creates a focus that doesn't force the awkwardness of some of
Yeah.
these conversations. And so we're super excited about it. We hope that it really helps families not just have fun around a game or not just learn a few things about each other, but actually learn how to begin to talk to one another about things that maybe they previously never would have thought to talk about.
I love it, and becoming that trusted confidant as a parent, and not that
Right,
reaction that I
right.
immediately had. Thank goodness my boys are grown, right? Oh, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. It's just a pleasure talking to you, and you have such valuable resources.
Well, thank you, Amy. It's been my pleasure.
And Marriage Champions, if you want to find out more, you can always find us at marriageinitiative.org.